The beginning of us. I never thought I'd be writing this, or that I'd ever share it with anyone outside a few close friends who barely listen anymore. But here I am, staring at my laptop at 11 p.m., with the kind of silence in my apartment that makes you question every choice you've ever made. I guess it's time to tell the story, not because it's dramatic or life-shattering, but because it taught me something I wasn't ready to understand until now. It started with Ellie. I met her in the kind of ordinary way that feels extraordinary only in retrospect. A coffee shop, a spilled cup, and some awkward apologies that led to laughter. She had this smile that somehow made the fluorescent light in that place feel warm, almost like sunlight. I was 32, recently single after a breakup that had left me doubting I'd ever care again. And there she was, unintentional but magnetic. Our early days were simple. Walks in the park, late-night talks, pizza on the living room floor while binge-watching old sitcoms. No grand gestures, no high-stakes drama, just quiet, consistent companionship. And somehow that was enough. She made me feel seen in ways I hadn't realized I craved. I didn't know then that small, everyday comfort can sometimes hit harder than any passionate confession. I remember our first weekend getaway, a short drive to a lakeside cabin, both of us awkwardly unpacking the car. We barely knew each other's quirks, but we laughed through every minor inconvenience. She teased me for overpacking. I teased her for underestimating how cold the nights would be. By the second night, we were sitting on the porch in silence, the lake reflecting stars that felt impossibly close. "You know," she said softly, "I feel like I've known you longer than I actually have." I wanted to tell her I felt the same, but I didn't. I just nodded, smiling, because saying it out loud somehow made it fragile, like words could break what was quietly solid. In those early months, I started noticing how differently I approached relationships with her. Past relationships had been loud, almost performative, arguments, apologies, drama for the sake of feeling alive. With Ellie, it was calm, grounded. I didn't need to prove myself or test her. I simply was. And that felt new, refreshing, terrifying in a way I didn't want to name. Inevitably, the small cracks began, though you wouldn't notice them at first. Little disagreements over plans, moments of miscommunication. She liked to leave little sticky notes around the apartment for me, sweet, harmless, and slightly controlling, like, "Don't forget to call Mom," or, "I know you'll be at the gym tonight, don't skip." I would roll my eyes quietly, but hide a smile. Eventually, she noticed my eye rolls. "You don't like my reminders?" she asked one evening, her voice tinged with hurt that she didn't deserve. "No," I said. Sometimes I forget to appreciate the small things." She looked at me for a long time, then laughed lightly, dismissing it, and I felt relief. Relief because her laughter reminded me that no disagreement had to linger. We always found our way back to each other. By the time we reached the 6-month mark, I felt like I knew her. Not every detail, not every thought, but I understood her in a way that mattered. I knew the way she frowned when she was deep in thought, the slight tapping of her fingers when she was nervous, the exact volume of coffee she preferred in the mornings. And she seemed to understand me, even the things I never said aloud, the tightness in my jaw when I was stressed, the way I retreated into silence when overwhelmed. But looking back now, I realized that my understanding, my calm, my desire not to rock the boat, was also my first mistake. I had a habit of keeping thoughts to myself, believing that protecting her from small truths or minor irritations was kindness. I didn't see it then, but silence, even with good intentions, has weight. It's subtle, almost invisible at first, but over time, it accumulates like dust in corners, unnoticed until you trip over it. And that's where the story begins, not with a fight or a betrayal, but with quiet, unspoken truths, small choices that seemed insignificant at the time. The kind of choices that, in hindsight, you realize were quietly shaping the end of something beautiful. I didn't know it yet, but the next 6 months would test everything I thought I understood about honesty, loyalty, and love. Not through grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but through subtle, almost invisible decisions, choices I'd have to live with for the rest of my life. The first cracks. The first cracks weren't dramatic. There was no shouting, no betrayal, no earth-shattering event that signaled the end. They were small, almost imperceptible, like hairline fractures in a perfectly still lake. It started with routines. I noticed myself growing quiet at dinner, distracted by work emails I thought she wouldn't notice. She caught me one night, leaning back in my chair, staring at my phone instead of listening. "You're somewhere else again," she said softly, but there was an edge, not anger, just concern. "I'm fine," I replied. Truth was, I wasn't, but I didn't know how to explain it. How do you tell someone that even in the safest, happiest relationship you've ever had, your own thoughts sometimes feel like strangers you don't trust? So I smiled instead, and we moved on, pretending nothing had happened. Then there were the little omissions, things I didn't mention because I didn't want to worry her, or maybe because I didn't want to face them myself. A meeting at work that went badly, a chance encounter that dredged up memories I wasn't ready to confront, the fleeting thought that maybe I wasn't entirely what she deserved. Each time I held back, I convinced myself it was kindness, but in reality, I was building walls between us. Ellie noticed more than I realized. She began asking questions I dodged, pointing out subtle changes in my behavior. Sometimes she laughed it off, making a joke about my mysterious moods, but the laughter didn't hide the worry behind her eyes. And still, I stayed silent. One evening, we went for a walk along the quiet streets near our apartment. The air was crisp, the kind that makes your lungs burn slightly when you inhale. I had a secret, a small, seemingly trivial detail from work, something that I thought she didn't need to know. But my hesitation made me tense, my words caught in my throat. "You're quiet tonight," she said, looking up at me. "Is something bothering you?" It's nothing," I murmured, forcing a smile. She frowned slightly, but didn't push. We walked in silence, the streetlights casting long shadows. In that moment, I realized how heavy silence could be, how much power it held to shape emotions, to build barriers. I wanted to tell her the truth, to open up, but fear, not of her reaction, but of my own vulnerability, kept me locked inside myself. Over the next few weeks, the cracks became more noticeable. We started having small arguments, not about major issues, but about tiny things, forgetting to communicate plans, misreading tones in texts, lingering tensions that neither of us could name. Each argument ended quickly, often with laughter or a quick apology, but the pattern was there, like faint lines in the sand before a storm. Then came the first moral dilemma, the moment when I realized that my silence wasn't just protecting her, it was protecting me from accountability. A coworker, someone I barely knew, confided in me about a personal crisis. She was going through something intense, something that made her reach out late at night. She didn't ask for advice, exactly, just someone to listen. I listened. I stayed up, typed back thoughtful messages, reassured her when she needed it. At the time, it seemed innocent. It seemed like empathy, kindness. But part of me knew it wasn't that simple. I felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in months. Noticed, needed, appreciated in a way that was different from what I got with Ellie. And yet, I didn't tell her about it. I told myself it was temporary, trivial, nothing to worry about. But every night I typed messages to her. Every time I hesitated to mention it to Ellie, I chipped away at my own integrity. Ellie noticed, in small ways. A glance at my phone, a question about why I was tired, the quiet suspicion that comes from intuition rather than proof. And each time she asked, I skirted around it. "Just work," I said. "Nothing to worry about." She nodded, often with a smile, trusting me. And each time, I felt a pang, not of guilt exactly, but of awareness. Of knowing that my choice to remain silent was slowly becoming part of a pattern. That pattern defined the next 6 months. Little cracks widened, subtle tensions grew, and yet, externally, everything seemed normal. We laughed, we cooked dinner together, we watched movies. The world saw two people in love, happy, ordinary. Inside, however, I was juggling truths I hadn't admitted, emotions I barely understood, and a fear of being honest that slowly grew into a silent shadow between us. I didn't see it then, but in hindsight, those moments, small omissions, quiet conversations with someone else, hesitation to speak, were shaping the trajectory of my life. The things I thought were insignificant, minor, even harmless, were quietly teaching me the cost of silence, and it was higher than I ever imagined. The moral crossroads. By now, I had gotten used to living with a quiet tension. The routine, the unspoken rules, the little lies I told myself. All of it had become background noise. But life has a way of forcing choices to the surface, and mine arrived on an ordinary Wednesday night. It was late. I was sitting at my desk, the glow of my laptop screen casting shadows across the room. The messages from her, the coworker I had been quietly supporting, were waiting. She was in a crisis I didn't fully understand, and she was turning to me because I was the one person she felt safe with. I typed back carefully, choosing words that would comfort without overstepping. And in that moment, I realized something frightening. I wasn't doing it for her alone. Part of me was feeding on the attention, the feeling that someone needed me, truly needed me, in a way that I hadn't felt in months. And yet, I didn't tell Ellie. The next morning, Ellie noticed my quietness. "You've been distracted lately," she said. I shrugged it off, avoiding her eyes. She laughed, but it was light, the kind of laugh that masks worry. I wanted to tell her everything, to admit that I had been emotionally leaning somewhere else for reasons I didn't fully understand. But fear, as always, held me back. Fear of conflict, fear of hurting her, fear of revealing that I was not the person I wanted her to see. And that was my moral crossroads. Do I remain silent, protecting myself and, in my mind, protecting her? Or do I speak the truth, risking immediate pain for the sake of long-term honesty? I chose silence. For weeks, the pattern continued. I was attentive, careful, kind, both to Ellie and to this coworker, balancing my words and my presence like walking on a narrow beam over a precipice. At times, it felt exhilarating, like I was living a double life, but not in the traditional sense of deceit. I wasn't cheating in the physical sense. I wasn't betraying her confidence intentionally, but I was withholding pieces of truth that were important, pieces that had emotional weight. Ellie started sensing it. I could see it in the subtle way she observed me, the questions she asked but didn't press too hard, the nights when she stayed awake longer than me, pretending to read while actually watching me type. Once, she asked casually, "You've been staying up late a lot. Just work, right?" My stomach tightened. I nodded. "Yeah, just work." It felt like a lie, but it was easier than the alternative, an explanation that would unravel everything. And yet, every time I typed a message, every time I typed a response that was more than just words but less than full honesty, I felt a twinge of guilt, a quiet, persistent reminder that silence can be more damaging than conflict. The thing I wanted to avoid, the difficult conversation, the uncomfortable truths, was exactly what was shaping the tension between us. The turning point came one Friday evening. We had plans to watch a movie together, order pizza, and unwind after a long week. I had been messaging her, the coworker, again, offering words of comfort. Ellie called from the couch, her voice casual but firm. "Are you coming to sit with me, or are you staying at your desk all night?" I froze. I could feel the weight of every unspoken word, every withheld truth, pressing down. My instinct was to stay quiet, to finish my messages and join her later. But something inside me, a flicker, almost insignificant, made me pause. I realized that my silence was no longer harmless. It was a choice that shaped our evenings, our connection, our intimacy. I closed the laptop and walked toward her. She looked up, curious, a small smile playing at her lips. "Everything okay?" I nodded. "Yeah," I said, sitting beside her. But I didn't tell her everything. Not yet. The moment of reckoning had not fully arrived. That would come later. For now, it was enough to be present, to pretend that the cracks were invisible, even as I felt them spreading beneath the surface. In the weeks that followed, I became more conscious of every message I sent, every word I withheld. I started noticing that silence was not neutral. It was active. It shaped reality. Every secret, even small, changed the way I interacted with her, the way I looked at her, the way I felt about myself. And slowly, quietly, I began to understand that my moral dilemma, my choice to remain silent, was no longer a private burden. It was becoming a tangible force that could either destroy or redefine our relationship. The first confrontation, the tension didn't explode. It crept, subtle and patient, until one evening it became impossible to ignore. We were in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, an ordinary task that usually came with lighthearted chatter. That night, it felt different. Every chop of the knife echoed too loudly. Every breath felt too heavy. Ellie finally spoke. "You've been distant lately," she said, looking at me with those eyes that could see through everything. "I don't know if I'm imagining it, but I feel like you're somewhere else." I froze. Not because I had no answer, but because the truth was more complicated than any answer I could give. I wanted to tell her about the messages, about the late nights, about the strange comfort I had found in someone else's words. But I couldn't. Part of me was ashamed, another part afraid. I swallowed, trying to form something neutral. "I'm just tired," I muttered. Her frown deepened, and for a moment, the silence that followed was heavier than words. Then she sighed, a soft exhale, and leaned back against the counter. "I know you're tired," she said gently, "but I don't think it's just that. You've been hiding something, haven't you?" I couldn't look at her. I wanted to, but my own guilt held me back. "It's nothing important," I said, my voice low. "Really, it's nothing." Ellie's patience has always been one of the things I loved about her, but that night, it was exhausted. "Nothing," she repeated, incredulous. "Because I feel it. I feel you pulling away, and I can't pretend I don't see it anymore." And that was the moment I realized silence had consequences. It wasn't neutral. It wasn't protection. It was a wedge, growing slowly but steadily, between us. I wanted to tell her everything. The truth, the messages, the way I had felt needed elsewhere, but fear made my words catch in my throat. "Can we just have dinner first?" I asked, hoping to buy time. She looked at me, her expression a mixture of frustration and sadness. "Fine," she said softly. But there was a sharp edge now, a subtle awareness that the foundation of our connection was cracking. Over dinner, the conversation was mechanical. We talked about mundane things, the weather, plans for the weekend, a funny comment from a coworker. But the air between us had shifted. Every word I spoke felt hollow, weighed down by the unspoken truth. I could see her noticing it, though she said nothing more that evening. Later, I retreated to the living room, hoping that solitude would give me courage. I opened my laptop for just a moment, tempted to check the messages I had been sending. But I stopped. I realized that even the act of reading them again, of engaging silently, was a choice, a continuation of the pattern I was beginning to hate in myself. The next morning, Ellie was quieter than usual. She kissed me goodbye with a small, careful smile, and left. I stayed behind, staring at the kitchen counter where we had eaten, thinking about how silence had transformed from a shield into a barrier. It was the first confrontation of many, even though no words were exchanged in anger. Just a quiet, lingering acknowledgement that things were not as simple as they seemed, that the love we had, the trust we had, could be reshaped, not by dramatic betrayals, but by the simple, human fear of honesty. And I understood then that I was at a crossroads. Keep hiding, continue the pattern, or face the truth and risk everything I had built. I didn't choose immediately, but that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized that silence had a price, and I was already paying it. The consequences of silence, 1-0-0-0. The weeks after that night were heavy. You could say the air between us had changed, but that would be an understatement. It felt more like we were living in two parallel worlds, the same apartment, the same routines, the same meals. Yet somehow, each step, each word, carried weight that wasn't there before. I tried to compensate. I brought home her favorite snacks, sent her good morning texts, suggested movies I knew she loved. All the little gestures that, in the past, would have earned a laugh or a playful nudge now felt like attempts to patch a leak I didn't know how to stop. Ellie noticed, and she noticed more than I could bear. One evening, while we were watching a film, she paused it, turning toward me. "You've been distant," she said again, softer this time, but with an edge of desperation. "And I don't know why. I feel like you're keeping something from me." I froze. Part of me wanted to blur the truth into silence again, to convince myself that a small omission wouldn't matter. But I knew better. Every day, every unspoken word had been building, layering over trust and intimacy until it felt almost impossible to repair. I didn't want to worry you," I said finally, choosing my words carefully. "Worry me?" she echoed, incredulous. "You think hiding things from me protects me? Or protects you?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because both were true. My silence was a shield, yes, but it was a shield for myself. Admitting anything risked unraveling not just her trust, but my own carefully constructed self-image. Days later, the consequence of that silence became unavoidable. A friend of hers, someone I knew vaguely through social gatherings, mentioned something in passing that made Ellie realize I hadn't been fully honest about late nights, my preoccupations, even small interactions with colleagues. The moment it hit her, I saw it immediately in her eyes. Confusion, hurt, and a quiet betrayal that doesn't scream but pierces. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice shaking, not from anger but from disappointment. Because I couldn't answer. I wanted to say, I was afraid. I didn't want to hurt you. I thought I was doing the right thing. But I didn't. All I could do was stand there and feel the weight of my silence pressing against my chest like a physical force. The confrontation was calm, almost eerily so. We didn't yell, didn't slam doors, didn't storm out. We sat on the couch, side by side, and for a long time said nothing. The room hummed with the unspoken tension, a tension born not from action, but inaction. My own moral dilemma had finally reached her awareness, and the consequences were as painful as I had feared. In the following days, everything became a careful dance around words I didn't know how to say. I tried to apologize, to explain, to show her that my silence came from a place of love, not neglect. But it was never enough. Because sometimes love isn't enough to erase the harm done by withholding truth. I began to understand something crucial. Silence has a weight. It's not neutral. Every unspoken thought, every avoided confession, accumulates, shaping the way someone sees you, the way they trust you, the way they love you. And for the first time, I felt truly accountable. By the end of that week, I realized that the cost of silence wasn't just the immediate hurt. It was the slow erosion of connection, the quiet distancing, the subtle reshaping of two lives once aligned. I had thought that keeping my truths hidden would protect us both. In reality, it had done the opposite. And yet, even in the midst of this, I couldn't help but see the good that had come from it. It forced me to reflect, to confront my own fears, to understand the fragility of honesty. I began to notice my own patterns, how I had avoided vulnerability not just with her, but throughout my life. And in that reflection, small as it was, I found a sliver of hope. Because if silence had a price, perhaps understanding it, learning from it, might be a way to pay it forward. The consequences of silence. The weeks after that night were heavy. You could say the air between us had changed, but that would be an understatement. It felt more like we were living in two parallel worlds. The same apartment, the same routines, the same meals. Yet somehow, each step, each word, carried weight that wasn't there before. I tried to compensate. I brought home her favorite snacks, sent her good morning texts, suggested movies I knew she loved. All the little gestures that, in the past, would have earned a laugh or a playful nudge now felt like attempts to patch a leak I didn't know how to stop. Ellie noticed, and she noticed more than I could bear. One evening, while we were watching a film, she paused it, turning toward me. "You've been distant," she said again, softer this time, but with an edge of desperation. "And I don't know why. I feel like you're keeping something from me." I froze. Part of me wanted to blur the truth into silence again, to convince myself that a small omission wouldn't matter. But I knew better. Every day, every unspoken word had been building, layering over trust and intimacy until it felt almost impossible to repair. I didn't want to worry you," I said finally, choosing my words carefully. "Worry me?" she echoed, incredulous. "You think hiding things from me protects me? Or protects you?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because both were true. My silence was a shield, yes, but it was a shield for myself. Admitting anything risked unraveling not just her trust, but my own carefully constructed self-image. Days later, the consequence of that silence became unavoidable. A friend of hers, someone I knew vaguely through social gatherings, mentioned something in passing that made Ellie realize I hadn't been fully honest about late nights, my preoccupations, even small interactions with colleagues. The moment it hit her, I saw it immediately in her eyes. Confusion, hurt, and a quiet betrayal that doesn't scream but pierces. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice shaking, not from anger but from disappointment. Because I couldn't answer. I wanted to say, I was afraid. I didn't want to hurt you. I thought I was doing the right thing. But I didn't. All I could do was stand there and feel the weight of my silence pressing against my chest like a physical force. The confrontation was calm, almost eerily so. We didn't yell, didn't slam doors, didn't storm out. We sat on the couch, side by side, and for a long time said nothing. The room hummed with the unspoken tension, a tension born not from action, but inaction. My own moral dilemma had finally reached her awareness, and the consequences were as painful as I had feared. In the following days, everything became a careful dance around words I didn't know how to say. I tried to apologize, to explain, to show her that my silence came from a place of love, not neglect. But it was never enough. Because sometimes love isn't enough to erase the harm done by withholding truth. I began to understand something crucial. Silence has a weight. It's not neutral. Every unspoken thought, every avoided confession accumulates, shaping the way someone sees you, the way they trust you, the way they love you. And for the first time, I felt truly accountable. By the end of that week, I realized that the cost of silence wasn't just the immediate hurt. It was the slow erosion of connection, the quiet distancing, the subtle reshaping of two lives once aligned. I had thought that keeping my truths hidden would protect us both. In reality, it had done the opposite. And yet, even in the midst of this, I couldn't help but see the good that had come from it. It forced me to reflect, to confront my own fears, to understand the fragility of honesty. I began to notice my own patterns, how I had avoided vulnerability not just with her, but throughout my life. And in that reflection, small as it was, I found a sliver of hope. Because if silence had a price, perhaps understanding it, learning from it, might be a way to pay it forward. Distance and reckoning. Time has a way of blurring edges, of turning sharp emotions into something quieter, duller, almost manageable. Months passed, and Ellie and I slowly drifted into a new rhythm, one that felt more like coexistence than love. We still shared meals, still said good morning and good night. But the spark, the warmth that once filled the small spaces between our words, had faded into habit. It wasn't that we stopped caring. It was that something in us had changed, permanently. Trust, once fractured, doesn't return with apologies or flowers. It rebuilds itself slowly, through actions, through time, through the consistency of truth. And though I tried, I could tell that part of her was still holding back, waiting to see if I would retreat into silence again. One evening, after dinner, Ellie asked quietly, "Do you ever think about how we got here?" The question hit me harder than I expected. I paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound rehearsed. "Every day," I said finally. "More than you think." She nodded, not accusingly, but thoughtfully. "I used to think honesty was just about telling the truth," she said. "But now I think it's also about not leaving things unsaid, about letting the other person see you, even when it's messy." Her words lingered. I realized that had been the heart of our struggle all along, the difference between truth and openness. I had told her facts, yes, but I had rarely allowed her into the quiet spaces of my fears, doubts, and guilt. After that conversation, we began spending more time apart, not out of resentment, but because we both needed space to breathe, to think, to find ourselves outside of the constant strain of mending something fragile. She started taking weekend trips to visit her sister, and I spent more evenings alone, reflecting, journaling, trying to understand what silence had taught me. During one of those evenings, I scrolled through old messages, not with Ellie, but with the coworker who had, unintentionally, started this chain of events. I hadn't spoken to her in months. Reading the old words felt strange now, almost foreign. What once felt comforting now seemed hollow. I realized that the connection I'd thought was meaningful had been built on avoidance, a way to escape the discomfort of facing myself. That realization hurt, but it was also freeing. For the first time, I could see my own mistakes clearly, without excuses or denial. I had hurt Ellie, not because I didn't love her, but because I hadn't learned how to be fully honest, with her or with myself. Weeks turned into months. Ellie and I began to talk again, not about fixing things, but about understanding them. There were no big arguments, no tearful reunions, just quiet, mature honesty. One night, as we sat on the balcony, she said, "You know, I don't hate you. I just don't think we knew how to communicate the way we needed to." Her voice was calm, steady. I looked at her, the city lights reflecting in her eyes, and realized how much she had grown, and how much I still had to. "I know," I said quietly. "I think I spent most of my life being afraid of saying the wrong thing. And in the process, I said nothing at all." She gave a faint smile. "That's the real tragedy, isn't it?" We sat in silence after that, but it wasn't the heavy silence of before. It was gentler, the kind that exists between two people who finally understand each other, even if they're no longer the same. That night, when I went to bed, I realized something important. Silence will always be part of life. It's not the enemy. It's what you fill it with that matters. You can fill it with fear, or you can fill it with honesty. The choice, ultimately, is yours. And for the first time in years, I promised myself that I would choose differently. The moment she turned back, the rain had been falling steadily for hours, and the streetlights cast blurry halos on the wet pavement. I wasn't expecting to see her. Not here, not now, not after the months of tension, awkwardness, and half-said words that had built a wall between us. Yet, there she was, sitting in the car parked under the same old street lamp, headlights off, staring at nothing. My first reaction was disbelief. Maybe she'd forgotten her keys, maybe she was caught in the storm. But when I got closer, I recognized her instantly. The way her hair clung damply to her face, the tilt of her head, the subtle tension in her shoulders. My heart thumped hard in my chest. I wanted to run, to escape the awkwardness, but something stronger pulled me toward the car. She didn't move as I opened the passenger door. She just whispered. I didn't know where else to go. Her voice was low, tinged with uncertainty, and yet there was a hint of trust, that fragile thread connecting us despite everything. I climbed in, careful not to splash mud on her shoes. The smell inside the car was faintly of coffee and wet leather, a strangely comforting reminder of countless small moments we had shared. For a long while, we said nothing, listening only to the patter of rain on the roof, our own breathing, and the occasional distant rumble of traffic. Then she spoke. Do you ever regret the things you didn't say? I took a deep breath, the weight of months pressing down. All the time, I admitted. But I think I've realized something. Saying something isn't always enough. Showing up, really showing up, that's what matters. Her lips curved into a small, tentative smile. She reached out, and I took her hand. It felt familiar, yet different. Lighter, not burdened by past misunderstandings, but still holding the warmth of connection we had almost lost. We didn't rush inside. We stood in the rain for a few minutes, letting it soak our clothes, our shoes, and our doubts. I remembered the countless moments I had hesitated, stayed silent, or avoided confrontation. And now, in this soaked street, standing beside her, it felt like the first chance to reset everything. We finally went back into the apartment. We didn't start talking about the past, didn't revisit every argument or misstep. We simply made coffee, listened to the rain, and began to share space without the weight of expectation. The silence wasn't awkward. It was a kind of quiet understanding. That night, as I lay awake, I thought about how easy it would have been to walk past her, to pretend I hadn't seen her, to let pride and fear dictate the next step. But showing up, being present, even without words, had shifted something fundamental. For the first time in months, I felt like we could rebuild, not as though nothing had happened, but with the knowledge that we had survived our worst moments and were still standing side by side. Learning how to speak again, expanded full version. The following weeks were a mix of awkward adjustments and small victories. We didn't try to force a perfect reset. Instead, we focused on ordinary moments, the everyday gestures that often go unnoticed but can define a relationship over time. Breakfast became a small ritual. I'd make coffee while she buttered toast, and we'd sit in the quiet kitchen, sharing anecdotes from work or stories about neighbors. Sometimes we laughed at trivial things, a cat stuck in a tree, a coworker's weird email, and sometimes we simply sat, letting the calm fill the space. It was a different kind of intimacy, quieter, more deliberate. I began sharing things I had previously kept locked away. My anxiety over my job, the guilt I carried for past mistakes, the fleeting insecurities about us, and even small hopes I hadn't voiced. She listened without judgment, asking questions or offering small affirmations, creating a space where honesty felt safe. Occasionally, friction arose. A forgotten errand, a miscommunication, or a slightly offhand comment could spark tension. But now, we approached these moments differently. Instead of escalating, we paused. We asked questions, clarified intentions, and acknowledged the discomfort rather than letting it fester. Those small exercises in communication became the building blocks of trust. We spent afternoons taking long walks, exploring streets we hadn't noticed before. I noticed how she laughed at little things, how her hands moved when she was excited, how her eyes lit up when she spoke about things she loved. I realized that intimacy wasn't just about conversations. It was about noticing and engaging with each other's rhythms, habits, and reactions. At home, we started small projects together, organizing the apartment, rearranging furniture, cooking new recipes. These mundane tasks became acts of cooperation, moments of connection that carried more weight than I had imagined. The very act of doing something together, of contributing to the same small goals, reminded us that partnership was a living, active thing, not just words or promises. One night, while watching the city glow from our balcony, she turned to me. "I don't want to be the person you take for granted," she said softly. "I want to be someone you notice, someone you choose every day." I realized then that love wasn't grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was showing up consistently, listening carefully, and letting presence speak louder than perfection. That night, I promised myself I would continue learning how to speak and how to listen in ways that truly mattered. After the silence, expanded full version. A year had passed since that rainy night. We were no longer the same people we had been, and our relationship was no longer the same. We had rebuilt something sturdier, quieter, more attentive. Mornings began with coffee and casual conversations. Evenings were spent sharing stories or doing small chores together. Silence was no longer a wait. It was a pause, a shared moment of understanding. I often reflected on how easily we had almost lost everything to unspoken thoughts and withheld words. But I also realized that silence can be instructive. It teaches you to notice what matters, to understand your own patterns, and to choose honesty even when it's uncomfortable. Conflicts still occurred, but we approached them differently. Small misunderstandings became opportunities to practice patience and attentiveness. We learned to recognize when one of us needed space, when a word could heal, and when listening mattered more than speaking. The mundane became sacred, making coffee together, walking home from the store, sitting quietly on the couch while reading our separate books. Each moment reinforced that love was built not just on passion or dramatic highs, but on consistent, intentional acts of presence and care. Sometimes, I catch myself smiling at little gestures she makes, the way she hums while cooking, how she leaves little notes on my desk, how she notices small details in my behavior. These are the moments that define us, far more than any grand romantic act ever could. When I think back to the months of silence, I don't dwell on regret. I focus on the lessons, that honesty matters more than pride, that listening is an act of love, and that showing up consistently builds the kind of intimacy that endures. Now, when we sit in quiet together, it's not heavy or uncomfortable. It's a space where we've chosen to be present, to care, and to continue learning each other's rhythms. And in that quiet, I know that love, patient, attentive, real, is stronger than any fear, stronger than any silence that comes before it.